Celeste Manno's life was full of promise, until a brief encounter with a disturbed man spiraled into a deadly obsession. Despite her desperate pleas for protection, the system failed her. What followed was a chilling descent into stalking, culminating in a crime that shocked an entire nation. Celeste Manno's life was a mosaic of ambition, kindness, and promise. Born on March 9, 1995, in Melbourne, Australia, Celeste was the youngest in her close-knit family. Her mother, Aggie DeMauro, and her stepfather, Tony, raised her in an environment where empathy and determination were valued. Celeste's radiant personality made her a beacon of positivity among her friends and colleagues. She was deeply connected to her older brother, Alessandro, with whom she shared an unbreakable sibling bond, often seen through their playful banter and mutual support. Academically gifted, Celeste pursued a degree in criminology and psychology at RMIT University. Her interest in these fields reflected her innate curiosity about human behavior and her desire to make a difference in society. Friends described her as someone who genuinely cared about the people around her, often going out of her way to help others, whether through volunteering or offering a listening ear. Her passion for justice and mental health advocacy painted a clear picture of the future she envisioned for herself. After graduating, Celeste secured a job at a call center for Serco, a company contracted to manage government services, including COVID-19 contact tracing during the pandemic. Her role involved assisting people with job seeker support and navigating the complexities of government services. While the work could be challenging, Celeste approached it with empathy and professionalism, often offering more than just procedural help. She gave reassurance to people struggling through tough times. Outside of work, Celeste was known for her vibrant social life and creative spirit. She loved painting, attending music festivals, and spending time with her friends, who admired her ability to light up any room she entered. Her bright smile and infectious laugh were hallmarks of her personality. She was also deeply in love with her boyfriend, Chris Ridsdale, whom she had met through mutual friends. Their relationship was filled with warmth, support, and shared dreams of the future. Celeste's life in Mernda, a northern suburb of Melbourne, was peaceful and filled with routine joys: family dinners, quiet evenings with her boyfriend, and weekends spent exploring the city with friends. However, beneath this idyllic exterior, an unrelenting shadow was beginning to creep into her life, one that neither she nor her loved ones could have anticipated. Louis Sacco was a man whose life was marked by instability, isolation, and growing mental health struggles. Born in Melbourne to an Assyrian family, Sacco's early years were characterized by a sense of disconnection. Friends and neighbors recalled him as a quiet, withdrawn figure, someone who struggled to maintain relationships and often seemed out of sync with those around him. His childhood and adolescence were largely unremarkable to those outside his immediate circle, but beneath the surface, troubling patterns were beginning to emerge. As Sacco grew older, signs of deeper psychological issues became more apparent. He was known to have battled mental health challenges, though the specifics of any formal diagnosis remained unclear. Friends and acquaintances noted his erratic behavior and difficulty in social situations, often perceiving him as someone who lacked the tools to navigate normal interpersonal relationships. While many struggled with such issues, Sacco's inability to connect healthily with others began to manifest in more concerning ways. Employment was sporadic for Sacco, with a string of short-term jobs that never seemed to last. One of these jobs brought him into brief contact with Celeste Manno. Their interaction occurred while Celeste was working at Serco, where Sacco became a client in need of assistance with job seeker support. The encounter was brief and professional, but for Sacco, it ignited an unhealthy fixation that would soon spiral out of control. Following this fleeting interaction, Sacco's obsession with Celeste began to take root. What might have seemed like a harmless crush quickly evolved into something more sinister. Sacco started following Celeste on social media, sending her unsolicited messages that grew increasingly frequent and invasive. His messages, at first polite and casual, soon became persistent and unsettling. Celeste, trying to maintain professionalism, responded briefly at first, but it became clear that Sako's attention was neither normal nor welcome. When Celeste finally blocked him on social media, thinking it would put an end to his advances, Sako's obsession only deepened. He created new accounts, found ways to bypass her attempts to avoid him, and continued his barrage of unwanted messages. What made his behavior particularly alarming was the intensity with which he fixated on Celeste, treating her not as a person with boundaries, but as an object of his obsession. Sako's fixation wasn't just online. He began making appearances near Celeste's home and workplace, creating a growing sense of fear and unease. His behavior was more than just that of a spurned admirer. It was the manifestation of deeper psychological issues that had gone unchecked for too long. Despite clear signs that his behavior was escalating into dangerous territory, Sako showed no intention of stopping. Friends and family of Sako, if aware of his actions, either underestimated the severity of his obsession or were powerless to intervene. His life continued to unravel quietly, his world narrowing as his fixation on Celeste consumed more of his thoughts and actions. What began as a brief encounter at a call center was rapidly becoming a dangerous prelude to something far more tragic. After Celeste Manno blocked Lue Sako on social media, she hoped the unsettling chapter would close, but Sako's obsession only deepened, and his behavior took a darker turn. What began as a flood of unwanted messages escalated into a full-scale campaign of harassment, transforming Celeste's life into a daily struggle for safety and peace of mind. Sako began creating new social media accounts to bypass Celeste's blocks. Each time she managed to shut one down, another would appear. His messages grew increasingly erratic, swinging between declarations of love and anger-fueled rants when he received no response. Sako's words, once merely uncomfortable, became threatening. He would describe his frustration at being ignored, his resentment festering with every unanswered message. The digital harassment was relentless, leaving Celeste constantly on edge. But Sako's obsession wasn't limited to the virtual world. He began appearing near Celeste's home in Mernda, watching from a distance. Friends and family noticed her growing anxiety. She confided in them about the stalking, expressing how unsettled she felt, but there was a sense of helplessness. The situation felt surreal. How could a brief professional interaction have led to such an unrelenting fixation? Celeste tried to take control of the situation by reporting Sako's behavior to the police. She provided evidence of his harassment, including screenshots of the messages and details of his appearances near her home. However, the legal framework surrounding stalking at the time left gaps in protection. Authorities acknowledged the harassment, but struggled to take decisive action due to the lack of immediate, violent threats. To them, Sako was a nuisance, but not yet a clear danger. Despite these setbacks, Celeste remained proactive. She filed for intervention orders and continued to document every interaction, hoping that a paper trail would eventually compel the authorities to act. But with each passing day, the stalking intensified. Sako became bolder, undeterred by the legal boundaries Celeste tried to set. His behavior suggested a man consumed by delusion, convinced that his fixation on Celeste was justified, even reciprocated in his twisted perception. The psychological toll on Celeste was profound. Friends recalled how her vibrant spirit began to dim under the constant pressure. She became hyper-vigilant, altering her routines and looking over her shoulder whenever she left her home. Her family, particularly her mother, Aggie, felt the strain as well, sharing in Celeste's fear but feeling powerless to protect her. By late 2020, Sako's harassment had reached a critical point. He was no longer content with virtual stalking or distant observation. His messages hinted at darker intentions, filled with veiled threats and allusions to violence. Celeste, aware of the potential danger, became increasingly desperate for protection. But the system that was supposed to safeguard her continued to fail. Sako's descent into full-blown obsession was now complete. His every thought seemed fixated on Celeste, and the line between infatuation and violent intent had all but disappeared. Celeste's life was no longer her own. It was overshadowed by the ever-present threat of a man whose fixation had evolved into a lethal determination. At the time, Victoria's laws required concrete, immediate threats or evidence of physical harm before law enforcement could take substantial action. Despite the clear pattern of harassment and Celeste's repeated documentation, the police were limited in how they could respond. They acknowledged the reports but explained that without direct physical threats or acts of violence, Sako's behavior didn't meet the legal threshold for more severe intervention. Celeste applied for an intervention order, hoping this would finally establish a legal barrier between her and Sako. However, the process was slow and frustrating. The intervention order did little to deter Sako, who blatantly ignored the restrictions, continuing to message her through new accounts and lurking near her home. Each violation was reported, but the response from authorities remained tepid. The legal framework treated stalking as a lesser offense, failing to recognize the pattern of behavior as a precursor to violence. The system's inaction left Celeste and her family feeling abandoned. Her mother, Aggie DiMauro, became increasingly vocal about the lack of support, accompanying Celeste to police stations and advocating for stronger action. They feared that without immediate intervention, Sako's behavior would escalate beyond harassment. Yet, each attempt to raise the alarm was met with bureaucratic hurdles and legal technicalities. Despite the clear warning signs, the system failed to recognize the severity of the threat. Celeste's cries for help echoed through police reports and legal filings, but they were met with inaction. The tragic irony was that all the evidence was there: the messages, the stalking, the repeated violations, but it wasn't enough to prompt the intervention that might have saved her life. In the early hours of November 16, 2020, the quiet suburb of Mernda, north of Melbourne, was still cloaked in darkness. The Manno household was asleep, unaware that the night would end in unimaginable tragedy. For weeks, Celeste had lived under the shadow of Louis Sako's escalating obsession, but nothing could have prepared her family for what was about to unfold. Around 4:10 a.m., Louis Sako approached the Manno home with a singular, horrifying intent. Armed with a kitchen knife, he navigated the familiar streets with chilling determination. He had meticulously planned this moment, fueled by his growing resentment and delusion. The legal barriers Celeste had fought to establish meant nothing to him now. He had crossed the threshold from harassment to violence. Sako reached the back of the Manno residence, where a window provided access to Celeste's ground-floor bedroom. The neighborhood was silent, offering no resistance as he removed the fly screen and quietly forced his way inside. Celeste, likely asleep or only just stirring, was caught completely off guard. The sanctuary of her home, once a refuge from Sako's stalking, had been violently breached. Inside, chaos erupted. Sako attacked Celeste with brutal force, stabbing her multiple times. The precise details of the struggle remain unclear, but the violence was swift and merciless. Celeste's screams pierced the early morning stillness, jolting her family awake. Her mother, Aggie, and stepfather, Tony, rushed toward the sound, only to be met with a scene of horror no parent should ever witness. By the time they reached Celeste's room, Sako had fled, leaving behind the devastation of his attack. Celeste was gravely wounded, and despite their frantic efforts, there was nothing they could do to save her. The wounds were too severe, the attack too sudden. Aggie's desperate cries for help echoed through the house as they called emergency services. But Celeste's life slipped away before paramedics could arrive. As dawn broke over Mernda, the Manno home transformed into a crime scene. Police arrived quickly, securing the area and beginning the investigation into what had happened. The brutality of the crime shocked even the most seasoned officers. neighbors awoke to the flashing lights of emergency vehicles, their peaceful suburb now marked by an unthinkable act of violence. For Celeste's family, the horror was indescribable. Aggie, who had fought tirelessly to protect her daughter from Sako's harassment, was now faced with a grief that words could not capture. The realization that the system had failed to protect Celeste weighed heavily on everyone who had been part of her life. Her friends, boyfriend, and colleagues were left reeling, struggling to comprehend how a bright, compassionate young woman could be taken so violently from the world. Meanwhile, Sako's escape was short-lived. After the attack, he fled the scene in his car, but his mind was unraveling. Less than an hour later, he drove himself to the nearby Mernda police station. Covered in blood and exhibiting signs of distress, Sako banged on the station doors, confessing to the murder. His demeanor oscillated between agitation and eerie calmness, as though the gravity of his actions hadn't fully settled in. The police quickly took him into custody, and it wasn't long before the evidence at the crime scene and Sako's own admission made his guilt undeniable. But for Celeste's loved ones, Sako's arrest offered little solace. The knowledge that he had been in custody was a stark reminder that the system had all the tools it needed to prevent this tragedy, yet it had failed to act in time. In the hours following Celeste Manno's murder, the investigation moved swiftly. The brutality of the crime, combined with the immediate confession from Sako, left little ambiguity about who was responsible. But the police were determined to piece together every detail, reconstructing the events leading up to that horrific night and gathering the evidence needed to secure justice. When Sako arrived at the Mernda police station shortly after the murder, officers found him disoriented and covered in blood. His confession was rambling but clear. He admitted to killing Celeste. Police quickly placed him under arrest and transported him to the station for further questioning. While his admission was a pivotal moment, investigators needed to corroborate his statement with physical evidence from the crime scene. Back at the Manno home, forensic teams worked meticulously. The window Sako had used to enter Celeste's bedroom provided clear signs of forced entry. Inside, the room bore the brutal evidence of the struggle. Blood spattered across the walls and floor, the aftermath of a violent and premeditated attack. The weapon, a kitchen knife, had been discarded nearby and was quickly recovered by officers. Investigators also examined Sako's vehicle, which he had driven to the police station after the murder. Inside, they found additional evidence linking him to the crime, including bloodstains and personal items that belonged to Celeste. His erratic behavior and disjointed confession pointed to a disturbed state of mind, but it did little to obscure the clear, calculated nature of his actions. Witness statements from Celeste's family and friends further solidified the case against Sako. Her mother, Aggie, recounted the months of fear and frustration as they sought help from the authorities. Neighbors also provided critical information, recalling Sako's presence near the Manno home in the weeks leading up to the murder. These testimonies underscored the systemic failures that had allowed his behavior to continue unabated. Forensic analysis confirmed that Sako's DNA was present at the crime scene, and his digital footprint, messages, social media activity, and search history further demonstrated his fixation on Celeste. By the time the investigation concluded, the case against Sako was airtight. The murder had been premeditated, fueled by months of unchecked obsession and a series of missed opportunities to intervene. Following his arrest, Sako was charged with the murder of Celeste Manno. The legal process progressed, culminating in Sako pleading guilty to the charge. On February 29, 2024, Justice Jane Dixon of the Supreme Court of Victoria sentenced Sako to 36 years in prison with a non-parole period of 30 years. In October 2024, while serving his sentence at Melbourne's Ravenhall Correctional Centre, Sako attempted suicide and was transported to the hospital in serious condition. This incident highlighted ongoing concerns about his mental health, both preceding and following the crime. What do you think the police could have done in this case? Or the family could have taken some measures, such as moving. Write your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Please rate the video by liking, and also sign up and play the bell so that you do not miss new videos. See you soon.